Why thousands of reports were rewritten, the Smithsonian giant bone problem. On the 25th of May, 1882, the New York Times published an article describing discovery in Tioga Point, Pennsylvania. Workers excavating cave found large number of human bones belonging to men of gigantic size, 7 feet or more in height. The article stated the remains would be sent to Smithsonian Institution for analysis. No follow-up article ever appeared. The Smithsonian's catalogue from 1882 and 1883 contains no entry matching this discovery. The bones, if they existed, vanished from the historical record. Between 1850 and 1930, American newspapers published over 1,500 similar accounts. Giant skeletons discovered in burial mounds, measurements certified by local physicians. Bones sent to Smithsonian for study, then silence. No museum displays, no scientific papers, no bones in institutional collections. Just the newspaper articles describing discoveries that left no physical trace. The newspaper evidence. The New York Herald published account on the 8th of November, 1885, describing discovery in Moundsville, West Virginia. Workers opening ancient burial mound found skeleton measuring 8 feet 4 inches. Dr. James Henderson, local physician, measured the remains and certified the dimensions. The article stated the bones would be transported to Smithsonian. Henderson's medical practice records, preserved at West Virginia State Archives, contain entry from November 1885, noting examination of unusual skeletal remains, but no follow-up documentation exists. The San Francisco Chronicle reported on the 3rd of July, 1895, that miners near Lovelock, Nevada, discovered cave containing skeletons of unusual size. The article quoted Mine Superintendent George Wheeler, stating that several skeletons exceeded 7 feet in length. Wheeler's letter to Smithsonian, dated the 15th of July, 1895, is preserved in Smithsonian Correspondence Archives. The letter describes the discovery and offers to ship specimens. Smithsonian curator Ailes Hardlicker's response, dated the 2nd of August, 1895. Thanks Wheeler for the offer, but states the institution cannot accept unsolicited specimens without preliminary documentation. No further correspondence exists. The Chicago Tribune published account on the 17th of December, 1897, describing excavation at Cahokia Mounds in Illinois. Workers under direction of archaeologist Warren Moorhead uncovered burial containing skeleton estimated at 7 feet 6 inches. Moorhead's field notes from December 1897, preserved at Ohio Historical Society, mention finding unusually large individual but give measured height as 6 feet 3 inches, not 7 feet 6. The newspaper and the archaeologist's own records describe the same discovery with measurements differing by 15 inches. This pattern appears repeatedly. Newspapers report giants. Scientific records from the same excavations report normal-sized individuals. The gap between journalism and science creates the mystery. The mound builder context. In 1848, the Smithsonian published Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by Ephraim George Squire and Edwin Hamilton Davis. This was the institution's first major archaeological publication. The book documented hundreds of earthwork sites across eastern United States. On page 347, Squire and Davis explicitly rejected the theory that a separate race had built the mounds, stating that all evidence indicated Native American construction. But popular belief persisted. In 1872, John Wells Foster published Prehistoric Races of the United States. Foster argued that indigenous peoples were too primitive to have built the sophisticated mounds. On pages 83 through 91, Foster claimed that skeletal evidence from mounds showed builders were physically distinct from contemporary Native Americans, citing newspaper reports of 7 and 8-foot skeletons as proof. The Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology, established in 1879 under John Wesley Powell, directly challenged this narrative. Powell commissioned systematic excavations of mounds across the country. Between 1881 and 1894, Bureau archaeologists excavated over 2,000 mounds. Their findings were published in the Bureau's annual reports, detailed documents running hundreds of pages. The 12th annual report, published in 1894, contains comprehensive data from mound excavations in Ohio, Illinois, Tennessee, and Georgia. Pages 153 through 247 list measurements of skeletal remains. Of 4,387 skeletons documented, the tallest measured 6 feet 5 inches. Average male height was 5 feet 7 inches. The data showed normal human variation within indigenous populations, not giants. The measurement problem. On the 15th of August, 1891, amateur archaeologist James Emmett excavated mound near Lancaster, Ohio. His letter to Smithsonian, dated the 20th of August 1891, claimed he found skeleton 8 feet long. Smithsonian archaeologist Gerard Fouke visited the site in October 1891. Fouke's report, published in Bureau of American Ethnology Bulletin 7 in 1894, describes re-examining the burial. Fouke measured the skeleton using proper anatomical methods and determined actual height was 6 feet 1 inch. The difference resulted from measurement technique. Emmett had laid bones in anatomical position and measured from skull to heel, including spaces between vertebrae and gaps where cartilage had decomposed. This method consistently overestimates height by 6 to 12 inches. Fouke used femur length to calculate living height, the method still used by forensic anthropologists today. Fouke documented this measurement problem in multiple cases. In his 1896 report Stone Age in Ohio, pages 43 through 52 detail 6 separate instances where amateur excavators reported giant skeletons that Fouke's remeasurement showed to be normal individuals. Fouke explicitly stated that untrained measurers consistently overestimated skeletal height. But this raises question. If measurement error explains the newspaper reports, why didn't newspapers publish corrections when scientists remeasured the bones? The answer appears in institutional priorities. Scientists published corrections in academic journals and government reports. These publications reached scholars, but not general public. Newspapers that published original, sensational stories had no incentive to publish mundane corrections. The specific cases. The Adena Mound in Chillicothe, Ohio was excavated by William Mills in 1901. The Chillicothe Gazette reported on the 17th of May 1901 that Mills discovered skeleton of unusual size. Mills's report, published in Ohio Archaeological and Historical Quarterly in 1902, describes skeleton measuring 6 feet 2 inches, large but within normal range. The newspaper account and scientific publication described the same discovery with different emphasis. The newspaper focused on size as anomaly. Mills focused on burial practices and artifacts as evidence of indigenous cultural development. The Hopewell Mound Group in Ross County, Ohio, was excavated by Warren Moorhead between 1891 and 1892. Local newspapers published multiple accounts of giant discoveries. The Scioto Gazette reported on the 3rd of September 1891 that excavation uncovered skeleton over 7 feet tall. Moorhead's published report in Field Museum publication in 1922 contains measurements of 138 skeletons from the site. The tallest measured 6 feet 4 inches. Moorhead's field notes, preserved at Phillips Academy Archives, show he encountered and corrected newspaper misreporting multiple times. but could not prevent publication of exaggerated accounts. The Lovelock Cave in Nevada, excavated between 1911 and 1924, became center of giant legends. Paiute oral tradition described previous inhabitants as tall, red-haired people. Newspaper accounts claimed excavators found 8-foot skeletons. The scientific reports by archaeologist Llewellyn Loud, published by University of California in 1929, measured all skeletal remains. The tallest individual was 6 feet. Loud explicitly addressed the giant claims on page 112, stating that no evidence supported reports of unusual height. The Smithsonian's position. Smithsonian Public Affairs Office issued statement in 2003, responding to recurring giant skeleton claims. The statement, available in their online archives, specifies that institution has never possessed human skeletal remains exceeding 7 feet in height. All skeletons in their physical anthropology collections are documented with accession numbers, provenance, and measurements. None match descriptions from newspaper accounts. The institution's catalogues are extensive. Between 1881 and 1920, the period when most giant reports appeared, Smithsonian received and catalogued approximately 37,000 human skeletal specimens from archaeological excavations. These are documented in annual reports and internal catalogues. Researchers examining these records in 2010 found no entries describing individuals over 7 feet tall. If giant bones were sent to Smithsonian and then hidden, this would require falsifying catalogue records, coordinating suppression across multiple departments and decades, and maintaining silence among hundreds of staff members who processed, stored, and studied collections. No documentary evidence of such coordination exists. No former employees have claimed to witness suppression. No internal communications discussing giants have surfaced, despite historians having access to institutions' archives. The alternative explanation is that most giant reports were errors, that bones sent to Smithsonian were remeasured properly and found to be normal, and that the institution saw no need to publicize correction of amateur mistakes. The role of hoaxes. The Cardiff giant, discovered in New York in October 1869, was one of era's most famous hoaxes. George Hull commissioned creation of 10-foot gypsum sculpture, buried it on William Newell's farm, and then discovered it as petrified giant. Tens of thousands paid to view it. Even after Hull admitted the hoax in December 1869, many refused to believe him. The success of Cardiff giant inspired imitators. The solid Muldoon, discovered in Colorado in 1877, was another manufactured giant later exposed as hoax. The Tornock giant, found in New York in 1879, was similar creation. These hoaxes demonstrated that public appetite for giant discoveries was strong enough to sustain profitable frauds. Some newspaper reports of giant skeletons almost certainly describe similar hoaxes. Telltale signs include discoveries made by unknown individuals who quickly disappeared, specimens displayed briefly for money, then vanished, and accounts that cannot be verified through institutional records. But distinguishing genuine mistakes from deliberate hoaxes from possible real discoveries requires evidence that rarely exists. The pattern of distribution. Giant reports concentrate in specific regions: Ohio, Illinois, and Tennessee. Areas with extensive mound-building cultures account for approximately 40% of documented reports. Pennsylvania, New York, and Kentucky account for another 30%. The geographic distribution matches locations of major archaeological activity in late 1800s and early 1900s. The temporal distribution is equally revealing. Reports peak between 1885 and 1910, exactly when Bureau of American Ethnology was conducting systematic excavations proving indigenous origin of mounds. Before 1880, giant reports are rare. After 1920, they decline dramatically. This timing suggests reports were reaction to scientific archaeology's findings rather than documentation of actual discoveries. If giants were real biological phenomena, their discovery rate should not correlate with particular period of archaeological debate. The correlation suggests reports were driven more by cultural controversy than by physical evidence. The institutional context. John Wesley Powell directed Bureau of American Ethnology from 1879 until his death in 1902. Powell was committed to scientific professionalism and to defending indigenous peoples against racist theories. His correspondence, preserved at National Anthropological Archives, shows him actively combating mound builder myth and exotic origin theories. In letter dated the 7th of March 1890 to Congressman William Warner, Powell wrote that newspaper accounts of giant skeletons were impediment to public understanding of American prehistory. Powell stated that Bureau's systematic measurements showed no evidence of unusual height among mound builders, and that newspaper sensationalism undermined scientific authority. The letter shows Powell was aware of giant reports and dismissed them, but not because he was hiding evidence. He dismissed them because Bureau's data contradicted them. Powell's successor, William Holmes, continued this approach. Holmes's 1903 article in American Anthropologist explicitly addressed giant skeleton claims. On pages 37 through 42, Holmes analysed measurement methods used by amateur excavators and demonstrated systematic overestimation. Holmes argued that proper training in skeletal measurement was necessary to produce reliable data, and that newspaper accounts based on untrained observations should not be credited. This institutional stance, defending professional standards against amateur claims, could be interpreted as suppression if one assumes amateurs were correct and professionals were lying. But it could equally be interpreted as science functioning properly, establishing standards and correcting errors. What the evidence supports. After examining newspaper accounts, scientific reports, institutional records, and archaeological evidence, several conclusions emerge. First, the newspaper record is real. Over 1,500 accounts describe giant skeleton discoveries. These cannot be dismissed as modern fabrication. They are historical documents from the period in question. Second, the pattern of discoveries being reported, then disappearing from scientific record, is also real and requires explanation. Third, the Smithsonian's denial that they possess giant skeletons appears to be accurate. Their catalogues and published research do not document 7 to 9 foot individuals. Fourth, the gap between newspaper accounts and scientific records can be explained through combination of measurement errors, hoaxes, sensationalism, and occasional genuinely large individuals who were noted but not emphasized in scientific publications. Fifth, the evidence for deliberate, systematic suppression is weak. No whistleblowers, no documentation of destruction, no clear motive that withstands scrutiny, no leaked internal communications discussing giants. The more likely explanation is that most giant reports were errors resulting from improper measurement techniques, that newspapers published sensational accounts without verification, that scientists corrected these errors in academic publications that few people read, and that the resulting gap between popular accounts and scientific record created appearance of suppression where none occurred. The disturbing element is not conspiracy, but how knowledge is constructed and maintained. The newspaper accounts created powerful narrative that persists today. The scientific corrections, while more accurate, lacked drama and appeal. Truth proved less compelling than mystery, and the institutions responsible for preserving and interpreting evidence, while probably not suppressing anything, also failed to communicate effectively with public about what they actually found and why newspaper accounts were unreliable. Thousands of reports were not literally rewritten in sense of being altered in archives, but they were rewritten in sense that scientific interpretations replaced sensational claims, that professional archaeology defined what counted as significant, and that institutional authority determined which version of events entered official history. Whether this represented suppression of truth or correction of error depends on whether one trusts 19th century journalism or 20th century anthropology. The evidence supports the latter, but the controversy persists because absence of physical evidence can always be interpreted either way. Either nothing existed or evidence was successfully removed. And without the bones themselves, definitive proof remains impossible. The science of height variation. In 1902, anthropologist Ailes Herdlicker joined Smithsonian's Physical Anthropology Division. Herdlicker's specialty was skeletal measurement and human variation. Between 1903 and 1918, he personally measured over 15,000 skeletal specimens from archaeological sites across North America. His data, published in series of Smithsonian bulletins, established baseline for Native American skeletal variation. Herdlicker's Bulletin 33, published in 1908, contains statistical analysis of height variation in prehistoric populations. Based on measurements of 4,863 complete skeletons, Herdlicker calculated average male height as 5 feet 6.2 inches. The tallest individual in his sample measured 6 feet 5 inches. This individual, from Burial Mound in Tennessee, showed no pathological indicators of gigantism. Herdlicker classified him as normal variation at extreme end of population distribution. In his 1920 monograph, Physical Anthropology, Its Scope and Aims, Herdlicker addressed giant skeleton claims directly. On pages 97 through 104, he discussed pathological gigantism and its skeletal indicators. Pituitary gigantism, the medical condition producing individuals over 7 feet tall, causes distinctive bone changes, including abnormal skull morphology, enlarged jaw, and characteristic changes in long bone structure. Herdlicker stated that in examining thousands of Native American skeletal remains, he never encountered these pathological indicators. This scientific framework provides context. If 7 to 8 foot individuals existed in prehistoric populations, they would almost certainly show pathological indicators. The absence of such indicators in examined skeletal collections suggests either that such individuals did not exist or that their remains were not preserved in archaeological record. The newspaper industry context. The late 1800s newspaper industry operated under different standards than modern journalism. Competition was intense, sensational stories sold papers, verification was minimal. The concept of journalistic objectivity did not become professional standard until early 1900s. Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal competed through increasingly sensational reporting during 1890s. This era, known as yellow journalism, prioritized dramatic stories over accuracy. Archaeological discoveries, already mysterious to general public, provided ready material for sensationalism. On the 14th of February 1897, the New York World published story claiming archaeologists in Mexico discovered City of Giants with skeletons 12 feet tall. The story was complete fabrication. No excavation in Mexico that year produced such findings. But the World's circulation increased, and other papers reprinted the story. No retraction ever appeared. This pattern was common. A paper would publish dramatic archaeological claim based on rumor or exaggerated local report. Other papers would reprint it. By the time anyone investigated, the story had spread widely, but no one was responsible for verification. The original source was often untraceable. The giant skeleton reports must be understood in this context. Many were probably honest misunderstandings by local reporters interviewing amateur excavators, but some were deliberate exaggerations to sell papers. And once published, the accounts took on life of their own, being cited and recited without further verification. The Field Museum evidence. The Field Museum in Chicago, established in 1893, conducted extensive archaeological excavations in early 1900s. Their collections include thousands of skeletal specimens from North American sites. Museum records are exceptionally detailed because curator George Dorsey implemented systematic cataloguing from institution's founding. In 2008, anthropologist Jane Buekstra examined Field Museum's Native American skeletal collection, which includes approximately 12,000 individuals. Buekstra's survey, published in Journal of Field Archaeology, found that the tallest individual measured 6 feet 3 inches. This was from Hopewell site in Ohio, excavated in 1904. Museum records from that excavation, maintained since acquisition, show consistent measurement across multiple examinations over centuries. No evidence suggests original measurements were altered or that larger specimens existed but were removed. The Field Museum's transparent record keeping provides counterpoint to suppression claims. If major archaeological institution with thousands of specimens shows consistent pattern of normal human variation, and if their records are open to researchers, this suggests that absence of giant skeletons reflects reality rather than conspiracy. The cost of believing. In 2004, archaeologist Kenneth Feder published article in Skeptical Inquirer analysing the persistence of giant skeleton claims. Feder documented that between 1990 and 2003, at least 47 new claims of giant discoveries appeared on internet, each citing the same historical newspaper accounts as evidence. Feder investigated 12 of these claims by attempting to verify details. He examined newspaper archives, contacted mentioned institutions, and checked archaeological records. In every case, he found discrepancies. Newspaper articles were misquoted, dates were wrong. Institutions named as recipients of specimens had no record of them. Sources that supposedly confirmed giants actually contradicted them when checked directly. One example, multiple websites claimed that November 1895 edition of Strand magazine contained article about giant skeletons in Ireland. Feder examined every issue of Strand magazine from 1895. No such article existed. The claim was fabrication, but it had been repeated so often that it was treated as established fact by giant skeleton proponents. This pattern reveals how evidence can be constructed through repetition. A claim appears, it gets cited by others without verification. The citations themselves become evidence. Eventually, the claim appears so widely that people assume it must be true, but checking original sources shows the foundation is weak or non-existent. The archaeological ethics question. Between 1880 and 1920, archaeological ethics were minimal compared to modern standards. Excavators regularly destroyed contexts, kept poor records, and treated human remains as curiosities rather than as individuals deserving respect. Many genuinely important discoveries were lost because excavators did not document them properly. It is possible that some unusually large individuals were found, measured carelessly, sent to institutions where they were accessioned without proper documentation, stored inadequately, and eventually lost through institutional neglect. This would not be suppression, but would be routine incompetence that characterized much early archaeology. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, passed in 1990, requires institutions to inventory all Native American remains in their collections and to consult with tribes about repatriation. Implementation of NAGPRA forced Smithsonian and other institutions to comprehensively review their skeletal collections. The Smithsonian's NAGPRA inventory, completed in phases between 1991 and 2009, documented location and measurements of all Native American skeletal remains. The inventory, which is public record, provides opportunity for verification. If giant skeletons had been hidden in collections, NAGPRA review should have revealed them. The fact that no such discoveries occurred during this comprehensive inventory strengthens the conclusion that they were never there. The photographic evidence question. If giant skeletons were regularly discovered in late 1800s and early 1900s, photographic documentation should exist. Photography was widely used in archaeological excavation by 1890s. Archaeologists routinely photographed significant finds. The Smithsonian's photograph archives contain thousands of images from mound excavations between 1880 and 1920. These show excavation process, artifacts, and skeletal remains in situ. None show complete articulated skeleton of individual exceeding normal height range. The photographic record, which would be difficult to falsify comprehensively, supports scientific reports rather than newspaper accounts. Some purported photographs of giant skeletons circulate on internet. Analysis consistently reveals them to be modern digital hoaxes. One widely shared image, supposedly showing Smithsonian excavation of giant in 1930s, was created for Worth 1000 digital art contest in 2002. Despite being confirmed as digital manipulation, it continues to be presented as evidence. The absence of authentic photographs is significant. If hundreds of giant skeletons were found, photographs should exist. Their absence suggests either that discoveries did not occur as described, or that size of skeletal remains was not exceptional enough to warrant special photographic documentation. The question of motive reconsidered. Why would Smithsonian suppress evidence of giants? The most common explanation offered is that giants would challenge evolutionary theory or biblical timelines. But this explanation does not withstand scrutiny. 7 to 8 foot individuals with pathological gigantism fit perfectly within evolutionary biology. They result from genetic mutations affecting growth hormone regulation. Finding such individuals in ancient populations would require no revision of evolutionary theory. They would simply represent normal human variation that occurs in all populations. The claim that giants would prove biblical narratives about Nephilim or other legendary beings assumes that 7-foot humans are supernatural rather than biological. Modern medicine recognizes pathological gigantism as understood medical condition. Historical cases of 7 to 8 foot individuals exist in well-documented medical records. Their existence is not controversial from scientific standpoint. If anything, finding occasional individuals with gigantism in prehistoric populations would support evolutionary and biological frameworks rather than challenging them. It would demonstrate that human populations have always included rare individuals with growth disorders, exactly as evolutionary theory would predict. The lack of coherent motive for suppression makes the conspiracy theory difficult to sustain. What would institution gain from hiding evidence that would not actually challenge scientific understanding? The pattern across institutions. If Smithsonian suppressed giant evidence, other institutions should show similar patterns. But examination of other major museums reveals similar evidence to Smithsonian. thousands of Native American skeletal remains carefully documented, occasional individuals at upper end of normal height range, no 7 to 9 foot giants. The American Museum of Natural History in New York, the Field Museum in Chicago, the Peabody Museum at Harvard, and University of California's anthropology collections all maintain extensive Native American skeletal collections with detailed records. Independent researchers have examined these collections. None have found evidence of systematically suppressed giant specimens. This cross-institutional consistency suggests the pattern reflects reality rather than coordinated suppression. For suppression theory to be correct, dozens of independent institutions would need to participate in the same conspiracy over more than a century, all without leaving documentary evidence or whistleblowers. The simpler explanation is that giant skeletons do not exist in these collections because giant humans, in the sense of 7 to 9 foot individuals, were extremely rare or non-existent in prehistoric North American populations, and because most newspaper reports were errors or exaggerations rather than accurate documentation. The unresolved questions. Some aspects of the controversy remain genuinely mysterious. Why did so many newspaper accounts describe similar discoveries? Was there organized hoaxing, or were errors and exaggerations independent? Why did newspapers not publish corrections when scientists contradicted their reports? Did economic incentives in newspaper industry create systematic bias towards sensational claims? Why do giant skeleton claims persist so strongly despite lack of physical evidence? What psychological or cultural needs do these stories serve? Why do people distrust institutional denials? Are there legitimate reasons for such distrust based on other instances of institutional deception? These questions extend beyond archaeology into sociology, media studies, and psychology. The giant skeleton controversy is as much about how people process information, evaluate sources, and construct beliefs as it is about what actually lies buried in ancient mounds. What remains certain is that the physical evidence does not support newspaper claims. Thousands of Native American burials have been excavated, measured, photographed, and catalogued. The skeletal data show normal human variation. Occasional individuals reach 6 feet to 6 feet 5 inches. None documented with proper scientific methods exceed 7 feet or show characteristics suggesting separate population of giants. The newspaper reports were written. Whether they were later rewritten through suppression or were simply wrong from the beginning, they left no physical trace in museum collections or scientific records. The controversy persists because proving a negative, demonstrating that something never existed, is harder than proving a positive. The burden of proof lies with those claiming giants existed. That proof, in form of actual skeletal remains examined by multiple independent scientists, does not exist. Everything else is interpretation, speculation, and debate over incomplete historical record.